All right, so we'll hold off on approving minutes. So we'll just start at the top of the agenda with, there's one thing. Well, I'll do that after. Okay, so we'll start with public comment. If anyone has any public comment, please feel free to just unmute yourself and share. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So as we go along, we're a fairly informal group, so feel free to add your thoughts as we go. The other thing, just a little housekeeping, it's not on the agenda, but I'm just going to ask folks, what are your thoughts about trying to meet in person in April? So we've been doing Zoom all along. I haven't tried to be skilled enough to do hybrid. And yeah, I just wanted to ask people what they think.
I think if the COVID cases are still going down, I'd be inclined to meet in person. Yeah, if things feel a little less rocky and but if this new variant that they say is coming up the outside lane, all of a sudden shows up and creates havoc, we might have to punt back to Zoom.
I guess I feel kind of two ways about it. I'd love to meet in person, but it's so convenient to not meet in person. I mean, for me, it's, we all probably have a bit of a commute to get there, and to get to the superintendent's office, I guess, is where we would meet. And it's 40 minutes for me, 20 coming, 20 going. So I don't know. But I'd be willing, but still, maybe we could alternate. I don't know.
Is that on the 5th, Krista?
Our next meeting?
Yeah. If we were to meet.
It's always the first Tuesday, and so.
All right. Well, I'm out of town that day, so it doesn't matter what I think. So I'll leave it to the rest of you unless we do it another night.
Okay. Coco, why don't you go ahead? I see your hand up.
Sure. I'm open to alternating. I think it is nice to be able to meet in person a little bit, but I do agree that evenings can be really tough to juggle. And sometimes we are able to get some folks who have younger kids on because they can participate via Zoom. So I'd hate to kind of give that up totally. And then the other question is, do you want to do a masked in-person meeting? And how does that shift just our abilities to communicate? There is something really nice, I will say, about being on Zoom without having to wear a mask and try to talk through that other layer of just communication challenges.
And Gabby, I see your hand up.
Hi,
Hi.
My name is
Thanks
Gabby. I sit in sometimes. I'm with the Center for Community Engagement at Middlebury College. I think sometimes you also see Shannon Lyford. I like to sit in and hear what's going on in the community so I can help with the student orgs I work with. And I know for me, it's really helpful for it to be on Zoom, but I also know that I'm not the target audience necessarily. So we'd be okay with either way. But it is definitely convenient when it is on Zoom and we can join from home.
Thanks for being with us, Gabby. Appreciate it. And if you ever have any insight on the community engagement front, please just sort of generally, please chime in. Okay, yeah, I think, well, and does anyone else want to add their thoughts on this?
I think it is a lot easier to sort of drop in for people who want to see what's happening. And for us, I agree. There is kind of a magic that happens in person where you can meet with people, but I think having it at least part of the time remotely would be really helpful, if not all the time.
So there are a couple different things we could do. One thing is so a couple times I've Zoomed in from central office, because up until recently, we're supposed to have somebody at a physical location for folks who aren't able to Zoom in. So one idea is for me to do that, which I'm right in town, so it's not a big deal at all. And that way we could, I was at a meeting today, in fact, where I was Zooming in, but there were folks in person in central office. And so, and it wasn't horrible. It was okay. You know, they were up, you know, I was up on a screen so they could see me. I could see everybody around the table. We could do that. So that way for folks who can't access Zoom, they could join us, but it still allows the flexibility of Zoom that I think we all appreciate. The other idea is to do the back to rotate, you know, 1 month in Zoom, 1 month in person. What are people's thoughts on those two ideas? Like preference over one or the other?
Well, Krista, what's your gut saying why to do it in person?
My primary thing is that everybody else seems to be starting to move toward that.
Yeah.
But I haven't gotten a big sense from this group that that's necessary. So I thought I would just ask. But I guess it was more just toward what other folks are starting to do more of, and recognizing the value of being in a place together.
I mean, one of the things I think about is we're usually a pretty small group. You know, when I think about the board and how many people, you know, the meetings of the regular school board, I think, man, it's going to be important for that group to get un-Zoomy as soon as possible, because with a much bigger group, it's very hard to, I mean, you've done wonders, Krista, you know, trying to make the Zoom technology work well. But with a group that big, I think you lose so much if you're not in person. But with a group that's pretty small like this, I'm not sure if we lose a lot by meeting remotely. I mean, I don't know. I've been doing it. I've been Zooming so long. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to behave in a in-person group. No, it's just, I guess it feels pretty familiar to do this in a small group. I have some groups that I meet with, that I've been meeting with, where I actually have never met with them in person. Once in a while we run into each other sort of by mistake, and it's always a shock to see each other in person. But anyway, I don't know if, I mean, I would be much more strongly in favor of meeting in person if it felt like we were losing something by not meeting in person. So it'd be interesting to hear how people see that piece of it. Would we gain a lot by meeting in person, do we think, or should we try it and see? That's another way to look at it, I suppose.
And I see that Rob just joined us. Hey, Rob, just so to get you up to speed, I kind of threw something in there at the top of the agenda, just asking folks what their take was on whether we should shift back to in-person or virtual, or some combination, stay Zoomy or some combination. So we're kind of talking through that right now. The other thing I was thinking is that once we get to the meat of the agenda, which is really planning our engagement, there's a couple of forums, fori, whatever the plural is, on there. And so maybe, this is the planning place is Zoom, but the actual engagement work is in person. That's another way to think about it.
Oh, go ahead, Rob, and then.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know how many people have chimed in on this already. Can you guys hear me? By the way.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, Krista, I'm trying to I'm racking my brain since I've been on the school board if I've actually ever met in person with the community engagement committee. To be honest with you, I don't think I have, because I hopped on March 2020. So I don't think we've had any in-person meetings. I like that last piece that you said in regards to this committee meeting over Zoom, and then our quote work or engagement events attempting to be in person or hybrid. I mean, I think moving forward, if we haven't learned anything from the pandemic, like we're trying to engage more folks, and I'd say especially like younger working parents. The hybrid option is a great one. I think for me, you know, I was juggling many things, got my daughter, and that's why I'm late, cooking dinner and stuff like that. I didn't have to get in the car and drive half an hour or 20 minutes down to Bristol or wherever we would meet. And I think, you know, a big picture as far as like maybe what the board looks like after today, and maybe we engage in more of a committee structure for the board. I think it allows board members who might want to try to engage in more work. The virtual option, at least for me, living at the end of a dirt road, is a great option to do committee work virtually, personally. And like Nancy said, we're a small group, and it'd be great to be bigger. I don't know if we were strictly in person, if that would create a larger group or not. I think it would create more limitation personally, at least for me. But and maybe hybrid's the way to go, but I know we probably wouldn't have the benefit of having Meet TV and Sean, who does an incredible job to allow our board meetings to be hybrid. I don't know if we'd have that resource, and that's a lot to ask of AV folks to try to come up with the hybrid model. So my vote would be to stay remote, at least as far as our meetings go. And then the engagement piece, hybrid.
And I just wanted to jump in to echo that the engagement piece, have a hybrid option for it so that folks can Zoom in, and then there could be a small group discussion or multiple breakout groups for folks on Zoom. I was looking at the agenda and seeing that, you know, that's coming down the pike this spring in terms of planning those discussions. And I just think it's really important to be able to offer the virtual option for folks. And again, just like Rob said, for parents and folks who are juggling kids in the evening, it's one of the only ways I think we've been able to participate in some of the meetings is because we can do it from home. And you know, when our screen goes black, we're doing bedtime or bath time, or putting the dishes in the dishwasher.
I do think it'd be good to revisit this this question fairly often, Krista, because, you know, I might feel really, I mean, essentially, I know it's March, but it's really the end of February, and and it's dark, you know, and I bet I will feel very different about it in May, when 6 o'clock is really when it's still light out and all, and warmer, hopefully. So that changes my perspective on things too.
Krista, you're muted. It looks like you're talking.
Oops,
though.
sorry about that. I was saying, I think I'll just stick with things the way they are for now, because they seem to be working. And I will maybe plan to just I think I will plan, and probably am going to be required to be physically present in central office, so that if there are people who want to join us that can't be on Zoom, they know that they can be there. And like I said, it's right, you know, I'm right here in town, so that's not a big deal for me. So I think we'll plan to do that. So I'm going to pause for a second, because we do need to just go back and approve our minutes and get that businessy part out the way, since we do have a quorum now. And then we'll move into talking about our engagement work. So if I can just get a motion from Rob or Liz to approve the minutes from February, that would be great.
Rob is so moved.
Great. Thank you, Rob. And I'm assuming we're all in favor. Okay, great. And Liz, you can, I think, just put that we've called to order at like 6:20.
Okay.
But you can include the notes from before in the minutes.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So I don't like sharing my screen because I can't see everybody, but I think it might be helpful to share my screen for this part of the agenda where we talk through the timeline. So I just wanted to say right out of the gate that this is just a draft, but I thought it would be helpful to give us something to kind of work from. And the reason why it's kind of ambitious and has us starting like yesterday. I think that it's important for us to, now that we have had the presentation from Nate Levinson and his draft report, and now we have his final report with all the additional documents. I think it's important that we are connecting with folks regularly about what's happening with that. And as I was thinking about what that could look like, that's how I came up with this timeline, but I love your feedback on it. So I'm going to see if I can find it. Okay. Nancy, can you see that? Okay. So I didn't, let's see, I only went through, let's see, last week in April. Sorry for the fast scrolling. Because I found myself realizing that while the ways we engage might be the same, what we're engaging about is going to start to become dictated by the board discussion and by what we're doing with different aspects of this report and what we want to share. But what I imagined was that, and some of this also has been informed by conversations with the Thought Exchange folks, and the need to really think about that tool being helpful both in giving people a place to ask questions, to learn more information, as well as to get input. And so the Thought Exchange that we ran previously was really about getting input. But I think we sort of briefly saw in one of our times with the Thought Exchange folks that we can also use it as a place for people to post questions. And so regularly using that tool helps it become more familiar to our community. It helps us become more familiar with the tool, and allows us to keep connecting with people as we're trying to figure out different phases in this next part of our work. So I started with us putting a column in, which we didn't do in the month of February. And so we're due for that. And that letting that be a place where we would let folks know that we were going to then do a thought exchange. My idea was that it would be around what questions folks have about the report from Nate. And I also wondered if we should consider doing a thought exchange about, in addition, what the board's priorities should be with this information. And after that lead up, that queuing of engagement with folks, bringing people together so they've gotten some information, they've gotten a chance to ask questions about it, and then having conversations with people about what they think about that report and what it meant to them. That was my kind of first initial thinking. That would all then lead into getting feedback before the board decided to pursue any of the different options on what people think about particular versions of that, like whether the 6th grade should go to Mount Aid, for example. And that would again be introduced with a column, then there would be a thought exchange about it, and then we'd bring people together to talk more about it. So that was my kind of general idea with this plan. But I'm going to pause now because I really want to hear what people think about how we should engage and about what I've kind of laid out here. Coco, go ahead.
Sure.
And if I don't see you raising your hand, we're a small group, so just feel free to unmute and talk.
Thanks, Krista. And thanks for sharing this. I think one thing that really stands out for me that's missing is what's going on with the merger study committee and that kind of communication. I know it in sort of the MAUSD board, it kind of exists outside of this quote unquote facilities planning. But actually, when I think about the heart of it and the core of this process, that committee is going to determine so much of the direction that is possible and the kind of ground on which the Levinson report will sit and the board discussion. So I just think that needs to be incorporated and a part of this communication on both the sort of community engagement level and on the board level, instead of operating kind of off in a different sphere. But I'd be curious to hear what others think in regards to that.
Yeah, if we could take a few minutes to go to that specifically, that's really good feedback. And so I'd like to hear, well, anybody can say whatever they want, but if anybody has thoughts particularly on that, feel free to share them now. Go ahead, Nancy.
Before I share my thoughts, I just want to share a revelation about Zoom that it's new to me, and maybe everybody else knows this, but it really helped me to discover it fairly recently, which is if you go up to view option, when someone's sharing their screen, you can go up to view options and make it bigger or smaller. But the other thing you can do is move it around. So you can click on it and move it around so you can shift where it is on the screen, independent of what the person who's sharing is doing. So that helped me a lot in a number of instances, be able to zero in on the part that was being shared in a way that I could really see very clearly. So anyway, in case that's helpful. I guess I'd like to share what sort of in my dreams, what would happen with this. I do think there's a place for us to invite people to take a look at the report and understand it in a deeper way than most people who haven't been in the middle of it do. But in my dreams, the board will be stepping back from this work and letting the administrative team work with Nate Levinson to come up with some very specific plans around specific components that the board really talked about at its last sort of regular meeting. That is, they're going to look at what it would mean to have a cost-effective mindset. They're going to look at bounded autonomy. They're going to look at their decision-making as a group, and they're going to be talking, among other things, about ways that principals might have more authority than they currently do around budgeting and supervising staff and staffing and so forth. There's, a big part of the, not a big part, but one of the components in the report is about coming up with sort of a formula for designating a budget figure to each school, and then having the principals in their own schools decide probably with their staff, about what would be the best ways to spend that amount in a given year. Anyway, it's a ton of work. And the administrative team, in the discussion I heard at the board meeting, when the board last talked about this, the administrative team, people were thinking that work would, with Nate and the administrative team, might take 6 months. And and they'd be thinking about, how to phase in the components, which components to phase in when, and all the other things I just talked about. So I guess when I'm in my dreams, the board would step back and let the administrative team really do that work in depth before zeroing in on any of the particular components of Nate's analysis, because we really won't know which components rise to the top of a superintendent's recommendation until the administrative team has had that time to work with Nate. And I'm very hopeful about that work. But I just think that, moving the 6th grade is an example of a piece that if the community talks about it now, it'll really muddy the waters for everybody. There's connections with the merger study committee that are significant. I just feel like it would be best to step back and let the administrative team work for 5 or 6 months, and then let them come forward and maybe they'll be giving, maybe the superintendent will be giving updates to the board. I imagine so. But other than that, I just don't know that there's a place for people to chew on the components until that administrative team work is really underway and maybe even done.
What are people's reactions to that, or thoughts on Coco's point? And that's really helpful, Nancy, for me personally, as a board member, to hear that perspective. So thank you for sharing that. What are people's thoughts?
I agree with Coco that I think the merger study committee is looming very large in people's minds, and particularly the kind of authority they have. And what the vote would look like if they vote on things, whether the board has sent any guidance to them, particularly about closing or keeping open small schools, about focusing on whether or not, there's something short of a governance merger that we can do. So I think an update with what, if anything, has happened with that would be helpful. I think that's driving a lot of the sort of push to disintegrate the district. So.
Other thoughts? Thank you, Erin.
I thinking about what Nancy said, it does seem to make some sense about not muddying the waters prior to the administrative team spending some time going through the report and possibly coming to the board with an idea of best next steps. I think it's important to share with the community about the final report. There's a lot of information in there, and it's, for the uninitiated or the people that haven't been following along, there's a lot to digest and a lot to look through. And I think, as we've said in the past, that it's important to use thought exchange in the best way that we can to gather input and to keep people engaged. So I like the idea of getting the thought exchange active around the process. I think the ad for the paper should sort of be a review of how the process came to be, what the process has been, get people up to speed with a short review, with links to the report itself, and then specifically next steps about how the district plans to move forward at this point in the process. And also an update on the merger study committee, although it just seems like I just keep hearing different things from different places about the closing of the schools, and it seems like maybe we need to put that to rest somehow, whether it's the information that people are sharing is inaccurate, or that the merger study committee hasn't been clear, or the district hasn't been clear. So it seems like we need to clarify some of that.
Thanks, Kim. Hang on one second, Nancy. I'm just going to see if anybody else has anything else to add who hasn't spoken yet.
Krista, this is Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
My hand's up.
Yeah, thanks for unmuting. I can't see you, but go for it.
No problem. I was trying to figure out what Nancy said about moving the screen. I can't figure that out, but that's just me. Yeah, a lot.
Sure, sorry, but just like hold your cursor down on like the black part of your Zoom grid, and you should be able to just drag it around. Does it move around for you?
I'll figure it out later on, or I'll
Okay.
try. Maybe I'll Zoom with myself and see if I can. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think, I mean, going back to Coco's point, and the merger study committee obviously is, for folks that are tuned in, is looming over everything, and just the powers that group has. All of our work, in a sense, and I'm not saying it ever would be as our committee or as our board, but could be for naught. To be very frank, like a new unified district, if it would be approved, would have a new board that represents 10 towns, could be completely new people at the table with a new superintendent. So I think about that, personally. I know that that's way out there, and it's not a good excuse not to try to engage and stuff. But I think people, at least I am, and other folks I've talked to, think about that. And going back to even like Patrick's presentation, like the middle school in a unified district would be in Virgins, and so thinking about the idea of moving 6th grade into Mount Abe, I think people that I speak to think about 6th grade being in Virgins now, no longer in Robinson or Beeman or Lincoln. And it's hard to disconnect those things, unfortunately, because we've somehow put them all together. That being said, I also completely agree with what Nancy also said in regards to, letting the administration and hopefully building leaders, really sit down and chew on Nate's report and come up with whatever a cost-effective mindset is, or bonded autonomy, all those things that I don't necessarily really get. I like the concepts, and I hope that, as a board, we've already directed our superintendent to move forward with those ideas. I think that's important to share out to the public, but also see how that plays out as we get ready to prepare for next year's budget. In regards to I don't know, I mean, it's hard. I still, I mean, the elephant in the room, obviously, for me tonight is the fact that it's town meeting day and 4 other communities voted on whether or not Lincoln is going to continue in this district. That being said, we still have a lot of work to do, whether Lincoln is in this district or not in this district, in regards to improving outcomes for all of our students. And I struggle personally to separate the work we do now from the powers of the merger study committee at the end of the day. And even when I think about Patrick and Katrina and all our building leaders getting together, that still seems to really muddy the waters. And I don't know how we can address that, so that, because I don't think until that's not a 706 merger study committee and it's just more of an informal group that's looking at ways to find efficiencies between our districts. Like I don't know how we can separate those two things, unless there are guarantees regarding, school closure and town votes. Because I mean, one high school, like does a former, high school group of towns not get to vote on if their high school is open or closed? I just can't. I'm sorry, I just can't separate those two things. I know this isn't a super helpful rant at the moment, but I do think reaching out to the community and using the thought exchange to actually have a conversation in regard to like highlights that you really like in the report, questions that you have for the report, what might be missing, what you really agree with. I think it's a great tool for us to have a conversation with the hopefully larger, broader Mount Aid community in regards to moving forward as a board. But, even the last board meeting, I think Dawn brought up the fact that something that we might consider as an action regarding like moving the 6th grade into Mount Aid. And when I hear that, I think that seems like we're moving really, really quickly. If that's an action that the board takes without really getting feedback from the building leaders and folks at the middle school, yeah, it looks good on paper financially, and then the broader community of what that means. So I guess that's where I'm at. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but there's a lot to digest.
Thanks, Rob. Let's see. Erin, why don't you go ahead, and then if nobody else, yeah, Erin, go ahead.
Thanks. I did want to bring up the, as Rob did, the issue of the vote tonight. I had asked Nate about how Lincoln's withdrawal, if that happens, is going to affect all of the calculations in the report he put out, and he basically said it wasn't part of their purview, and so they don't have any answer to that. But obviously, if the vote passes tonight, we're looking at an extremely different district, and I think we need to have a response ready to that, because everybody opening the paper tomorrow is going to wonder what change that's going to make if it does pass. So even I think we need to come up, even if the answer is we don't know yet, we haven't been looking at this yet, I think we need to have a pretty quick response to let everybody know, for one, that the CIC process didn't have anything, was banking on the 5 towns and does not have a 4-town numbers or calculations or anything wrapped into that report.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, go ahead. Nancy?
Thanks. A couple of things. I guess I do need to say, quite honestly, that Starksboro is still considering withdrawing from the district, and we haven't made that decision yet. But it's the work of the merger study committee and the fact that they have not provided an assurance about preserving our right to vote before a school is closed. That's really what's pressing on us, and so that isn't really part of our discussion maybe tonight, but since Erin said what she said, and Rob too, I just felt, to be honest, I just wanted you all to know that that is the case. In terms of what we might do, I think helping people understand the Levinson report, including correcting some misconceptions that I think people have about it. I've heard at a board meeting, at least one board member, I think just one board member, claim that the Levinson report indicates that merging with Addison Northwest is the best option and what we should do. And that's really not the case. And we need to correct that that misconception. I mean, the report does say that option seems to be in keeping with the community input committee, and that it does have some savings attached to it, but it was absolutely
Nancy,
not.
Nancy, can I stop you for a second and just ask Krista to stop sharing her Gmail screen? Thanks.
Okay. Oh, that's much better than her Gmail.
Yeah, it was
Thank
full
you.
of comments about the Lincoln withdrawal vote. And I think that's just not going to be a direction that feels comfortable to have in this.
Well, that was obviously a
engagement.
mistake, Coco. So thank you for pointing
Sure.
out, but it was not deliberate.
So anyway, so I think we could focus on helping people understand the report if people are interested. And I don't know how many people will be. I think people are going to get more interested when the administrative team starts to put some meat on the bones and get close to or get in the middle of making some recommendations to the board. But still, I think it's important to try to get people interested in it and correct misconceptions and help people understand what some of it means to the extent that we understand it. And certainly understanding the work of the Merger Study Committee to the extent that anyone can understand that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I do, but I think those two pieces would be helpful. But I think we should hold off, and so should the board, trying to make decisions about other components in the plan.
And I just want to check in. Thank you, Nancy. Before we go to you, Coco, I know you've had your hand up, but I just want to see, we haven't heard from Mary or Liz yet. So you don't have to speak, but I just want to give you the chance.
I'll definitely speak. For me, when we are talking about the plan that they're going to put together for the efficiency mindset to keep all the schools open and what that looks like and how they're going to go about that, to me, what that is our budget season next year. That's going to come around fall. They're going to be working on the plan for the following year. And those things they're going to happen, right? Like, so I look at that more as what we're doing now to address the problems and have our schools open. Because that's what we have to do. So that's how I see that. I see that as a budget presentation and all of those parts. And yes, I definitely want people to understand it, and I want to know how they feel about it. And I I certainly hope for the best. So that's what that is to me, is the construction of our plan going forward. And there's so much other stuff to talk about. There's so much, like the transportation, and there's a lot of other pieces in there that I think could get some time and attention. So I look forward to engaging the community about this, as basically I see the work they're going to be doing over the next 6 months as what the structure, like how our schools are going to look and how they're going to function. And I see the rest of it as options for potential other phases. If some part of that is not satisfying the needs of our students or families or teachers, and looking at other options. So that's my perception.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, go ahead, Coco.
Sure. I just wanted to come back a little bit to a clarification that I think the Community Engagement Committee needs to make in regards to any kind of output that we we develop is that the merger study committee is a binding committee. The Nate Levinson report is a recommendation. And I think it really remains to be seen what the merger study committee is going to do in terms of the town's right to vote. I listened in on that meeting, and I don't know if anybody else was there, but I found it really alarming at how anti-democratic it was in regards to the town's right to vote and whether or not we should ensure that and what those articles of agreement will look like. And so I think that is, that's a really important distinction. And to move forward with Nate Levinson's report as here's what, the direction the district is going in, without really fully acknowledging that is not a binding piece of, that's not a binding document or a binding plan. What's already been set in motion and the conversation that's happening at the merger study committee is really alarming if you support small schools and if you support a town's right to vote. Because I think from what I've heard and where I've been able to tune in, they're moving in the other direction about a town's right to vote. And I think the Community Engagement Committee, I don't know if it's our purview to engage with the merger study committee, but I feel like they've been sort of operating on their own. And having that conversation without a lot of input from the communities. I know they did one community event. I went to that event. The entire group that I was in, breakout group, was really against the merger. And those were folks in Addison Northwest and folks in MAUSD from all different towns, because they felt like, they didn't want to be sending kids, busing kids all the way over there for middle school. And they also, Addison Northwest felt strongly that they don't want to close their remaining small schools either. And so to work on this project and not acknowledge that the merger study committee is the binding force in the room right now, I think really does a disservice to the quality of engagement and that trust that we're trying to rebuild in the community. If of course MAUSD wants to rebuild that trust. So thanks for hearing me out. I'm going to hang on as long as I can, but I'm still at work and I'd love to get home before bedtime. So I may have to duck out at some point. I really appreciate all the conversations in the room, and I thank you all for the thoughtfulness and hearing me out as well.
I'd just like to say we certainly want trust, most definitely. And I also went to that merger study committee, and my group was really worried about special education. I had parents from their district and from our district. I had parents from their district that talked about how when we asked the question of what does local mean to you, right? That was one question. And a parent from the other district said that changed for them based on, when their child was in elementary school, they had been at the elementary school that was closed, and now local meant something different. It meant them and us, right? And then when their kids got to high school, because they had 5 kids and they were all over the place, that local meant whatever the high school community. So that local changed and grew with them over time because they've had some experiences. And our MAUSD people were really thinking about special education services. So we didn't talk about the right to vote or whether we are pro or against the merger. We talked about our needs. And I wasn't actually even talking, I was note taking for the committee, but that was right up my alley. So there's so much more, and that's why I'm excited for us to take this and follow some kind of a plan to get input, because there are a lot of different perspectives out there, and there are people that are worried about a lot of different things. And I know that we have some really serious concerns about school closure and the right to vote, but there are people worried about whether or not their child has access today, right now, and whether this teacher has support today, right now. And it's scary for them to think about, what is this efficiency mindset going to look like? What is it going to look like? What are we going to exchange and replace for something else. I mean, so I too am just holding back, and I'm just going to wait and see what it looks like, because I know no matter what happens, we're going to be okay, because everybody's going to wrap around our kids no matter what. That's what we do. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. But so yes, we let that play out, but I do still feel like there's more to hear. And I really like Krista's plan. And as much of it as we can make possible. As far as in person or remote, I was thinking about that when you guys were talking. It almost makes more sense to me to have a remote community engagement and an in-person community engagement, because the hybrid is really tough, I think. So maybe even just doing two and saying, sure, let's do both. So that all different, you know, so that's, I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Liz.
I really like your idea about having some community engagement events on Zoom and some in person, and not try to do both at the same time, Liz, because I think, gosh, that it's pretty darn hard to make that work, that hybrid model. And we could do both. That's a great idea.
Liz, thank you for what you had to say, because you're right. You know, our community and how we define community is might be different, but that the community will come together to support our kids, because they always have. And I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that we may not necessarily represent the community. We have factions of people that we might be associated with for however we're involved in this committee. But I think what we have to do is remember that there are way more people out there that need representation and need to be heard about what they think is important. And so our job as a community engagement committee isn't to further our own way of thinking around this process, but it's to provide the opportunity for people in the community to share the information with us. And so, you know, I have felt that way since we started this committee, and I think that it's really important that we look at ways of reaching out. And it's not just us 10 people or whoever's here week to week about what we think. I think it's really important that we reach out to people in our communities that we don't hear from, and the people that we don't talk to every day, and the people that we don't interact with in our subgroups and our subcommittees, because they have a lot to say and they have a lot of concerns as well. So it'd be really great from my perspective if we all took a step out of the box that we put ourselves in to look at ways that we can really, and again, how you define community is up to you, but that if we are engaging our community, we got to figure out how we're going to engage them, not how we're going to tell them what we think or push what we feel is important. So, and I'm not saying that those things aren't important, but what I'm saying is that our job is to really support the whole community. So I just feel like that needs to be said, because I feel like we've sort of dovetailed into this space where we're trying to maybe push our own agendas and push what's important to us. And I just don't think that is the purview of this committee. So.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Kim, what you've just said, and Liz, what you've just said have been the driving reasons why we began talking some months, perhaps years ago, about establishing school advisory councils. Because one of the problems that we're facing is, as part of consolidation, you know, when you move the governance a little bit farther from the schools, it gets harder for a community engagement committee for the whole district or the board for the whole district to really be hearing the different perspectives from their community. But if we have an advisory group that's meeting and it's school-based, it can much more, it can in a whole bunch of different ways bring people in who won't come to a meeting like this and won't go to a board meeting that is, you know, filled with 15 board members. I mean, so, you know, if we really want to hear people and hear people's ideas and concerns that we're not already hearing, that would be one big way to make that happen in each of our towns.
Thanks, Nancy. And just so folks know, if you're not aware, we've asked Patrick to bring the school advisory council notion to building principals, because we want to make sure we have their feedback and ideas on what that would look like. So that's where that's at right now. So thanks for reminding us about that. Coco and then Erin.
Sure. Thanks, Kim and Liz, for your points. And I just want to say that I'm not like here to represent a particular viewpoint, but I'm here to really encourage the Community Engagement Committee, if they are interested in building trust in the communities, which is in my opinion, fairly eroded at this point, that it is really essential to acknowledge all of the players in the room and to acknowledge the forces with which those players, like the Merger Study Committee, carry in the future of MAUSD and really the future of both of these districts. And so that's where I've been really kind of digging in my heels, that if we don't do that work, then we're going to continue this process of folks feeling like a piece of the puzzle is being left out. And the wool is sort of being pulled over people's eyes to say, well, the board did vote, you know, to allow towns to vote on school closure, but actually that was already in Articles of Agreement to begin with. And really, I just want to say that I think that building of trust is really the key component here. In order to do that, there has to be a level of transparency in the communications from MAUSD and from the Community Engagement Committee, so that folks feel like they have a good, you know, lay of all of the forces that are operating. So.
Go ahead, Erin.
I think that's true. I wanted to ask a quick question about what the board's authority is at this point to interact with the Merger Study Committee, because you know, just the things that I've been hearing in the community are primarily directed at the Merger Study Committee and sort of this kind of loose cannon perception of, you know, this is going off, it's not democratic, we don't have control over it. And I was just wondering, because I think that we could use thought exchange, for instance, to get people's perceptions on the Merger Study Committee, what they would like the board to communicate to them, the sort of guardrails they'd like to have, and also the questions that they still have about it. We could get a lot of great information about that. But if there's no authority that the board has to interact with the Merger Study Committee, then it is sort of moot. But if there is a statement that the board could then issue based on that, that could be super helpful for people. For instance, with if the board decided that they wanted to say to the Merger Study Committee, we recommend strongly that you have some protections for a town, school not being closed without its approval, or we insist on having this this in there, then that could allay a lot of concerns. And that, anyway, so I think that we could reach out to the community via thought exchange, but I sort of think we need to figure out where we're going with that first, what we're going to do with the information.
I'd be happy to try to provide what I believe to be true about the merger study committee, if that's helpful, Erin. So we have 4 board members that represent MAUSD on the merger study committee. And our board has set for next agenda, I believe, to try to come to some consensus around either a recommendation or a statement or some sort of a recommendation or a statement to the merger study committee about their work. We can offer that to the merger study committee and they can decide to do with that what they'd like. However, they need to, well, there's what they need to do and there's what would make sense for them to do. They will decide to come up with, they being all those single individuals, including our 4 board reps and our community members, come up with their proposal. And it's going to come back to each board for their, for a response or for their feedback. And then they could decide to incorporate that feedback or not. But it has to ultimately go to all of our towns to be voted on.
That's a majority vote within each district. So there could be a town that
actually, no, I'm sorry, that's not true. I believe I got clarification on that recently, that every single town needs to vote yes for that merger to go through.
I don't think so.
Okay, so then I will get more information and get back to you guys by email.
And I think that would be an excellent thing to communicate with the community once we figure out the answer to that question.
Okay, but so either way, let's just think this through as reasonable folks. It doesn't seem to me to make a whole lot of sense for a committee to put forth a vote that very many people in the community are not going to support. I just have a very hard time believing that, and I think Nate Levinson spoke to this a bit, that it's kind of a dead in the water proposal if you don't have the right for towns to vote before a closure written into that proposal. So any reasonable person is going to not suggest that such a proposal go before voters if it is going to be so hugely unpopular, especially because if, as Nate report does say, a merger would be beneficial. You know, whether he said it's the most beneficial or not, it is something that could be very beneficial in meeting many of our goals. So it wouldn't behoove us to try to advocate for such a merger if it didn't include that provision, if we know that that's going to make it fail. So I think we've lost this notion of rationality based on fear. And that's my own personal opinion. But, you know, to your point, Coco, about being clear with people that this is binding and Nate Levinson's report is not binding, that's more fear. That I don't think is helpful for folks. I don't think it's binding in the way that you're asking us to say it is. As I think also about, again, looking at the example of how we've responded to the outcry with Patrick Green's proposal, what you've seen is a board that's pivoted and said, hey, wait a minute, this is hugely unpopular. Even if on paper it makes the most sense in the world, it's not a good idea if nobody likes it. So I think that's the same with the merger study committee. Now, that requires some trust and faith in the process. I understand that, but I feel like this committee has been very transparent. I think it's unfair to say that we haven't communicated and we haven't been transparent. And so I feel like we should continue to do that. I really agree with the idea that maybe now is not the time to get people's feedback on what next with Nate's plan. I really do agree with the idea that we should keep informing folks about the work of the Merger Study Committee. Absolutely, we should keep them up to date. And any discussions that the board has about that, absolutely. But I think it's a mistake to try to draw this line in the sand of an authority that I think is out of context to the climate and to what I think is realistically and most likely to happen. So I would like to just say that, you know, I'm kind of going on and not acting like a chair and sharing my own personal thoughts, but
you get to, come on, you get to do that.
So I'm going to stop now. I see a bunch of hands. I've probably gotten everybody all fired up, but I saw Rob's first. So you go ahead, Rob.
Oh, Krista, you know I'm always fired up. I'm going back a little ways to Kim's point, and I also think Nancy's point. You know, I mean, today is the district's largest point of community engagement, right? Like the opportunity for people to vote up or down a budget and for the first 10, you know, articles, whether or not we get a salary as board members and treasurer and all that. And I mean, I think we need to recognize that that's the lowest hanging fruit as far as community engagement. It gets the most folks to come out. And thinking about, you know, because it comes up once in a while for pillow talk with my wife regarding all the work that went into the survey that we did right after Patrick's proposal. And then to be completely honest, the board had no questions and we did nothing with it to a certain extent. We still have that data and I think it's still valid data, but you know, I think we've tried, and where people lose faith, myself included, is when we just sort of don't give it the time or the space to bring forth either our own opinions, to ask for clarifications. I'm still sort of a little frustrated by that, and that's a year ago. I apologize, but that being said, I think, you know, surveys actually can be a useful tool to garner more engagement for folks that can't make a meeting. And I mean, I do think it's really important that we can continue to engage folks around what we're doing as a district. I don't want to say that we shouldn't, but I also think we need to be very honest in our communication regarding, you know, what we're doing as a district and what else is going on outside of our district that can influence our district. I would hesitate not to say anything about what the merger study is doing, and not saying like the worst case scenario, but just being, you know, open and honest. And I'm not saying this committee, the Community Engagement Committee, hasn't. I just think we can continue to do that work and do a better job with it. And I know I'm trying to think, like Krista, what you were saying, and in regards to the merger study committee and that it wouldn't necessarily, you know, pass and all that. I mean, my sense, and I didn't live here prior to the Act 46 vote, and I live in one town. So you know, I live in my own little bubble. Is that people still feel really, really burned in regards to what a unified district is. And so I said this at the merger study committee, and I think it is relevant to this committee, is like, I hope they're not just wasting their own time because people are no longer naive to what a unified district means. And we're not rational people. I can speak for myself. I am not necessarily a rational person, but to just say that, well, don't worry about it, like it'll be all good, also isn't fair, because that's the reason why one town has voted to leave our district and another town is considering it. And to think that doubling down on what necessarily might not have worked thus far in a larger context, I I agree with you. I think it'd be wildly unpopular, and I don't think it's this committee's role to necessarily try to, influence what people are thinking about it. I think it's our role to ask what questions they have, not only about the Nate Levinson report, but this idea of a merger, because we cannot just do our work and not consider the merger study committee part of our work, is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. And so is there a way we can engage the public in regards to, hey, Mount Abe as a district, we're moving forward as a district because we are still a unified district, but what would you think about these other things that are part of the report also and going on simultaneously as we speak? What are your feelings? I think it'd be great information for us to have as a committee, as a board. And if the merger study committee isn't going to do that work to the level that they should, well, I hate to put it on our shoulders, but I think it's work that should be done.
Thank you, Rob. Nancy? I think you're still muted, Nancy.
Can Paul go ahead, because he's had his hand up and he really hasn't.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead, Paul. Sorry about that.
Thanks. And I need to leave in a few minutes because I need to go down to the Lincoln town office. I think the board is in an incredibly tough situation because there's so much going on at the same time, and it's reasonably complex. I think one thing that everybody needs to be careful about is not setting unrealistic expectations. So when it comes to Nate's report and recommendations, I've been in the consulting business long enough to know that when I make a recommendation and write a report for a client, there is a good possibility that they will read it and put it on the shelf. So I think everyone needs to be careful not to equate Nate's recommendation with it's really going to happen, because there are so many things that could come into play between now and when decisions are made. I am curious as to why the MAUSD board, well, let me put it a different way. I'm curious as to what the plan is for the MAUSD board to strongly influence the merger committee on this town vote. I just don't see it yet. And I guess the last thing is that the board did vote on a set of goals to keep the elementary schools open. But I think it's a mistake to equate goals with a commitment. I don't see a commitment in that motion that was passed. So thank you for letting me speak. I'm sorry to have to run, but I'm needed down at the town office.
Thanks, Paul. Nancy, go ahead.
So I want to go back to how you were describing, Krista, how the merger study committee process works. And I think a piece I just wanted to clarify is, so when the merger study committee is ready to make a recommendation about merging or not, I guess they're going to go back to the individual boards and explain their rationale for whatever they're thinking about whether to recommend merger or not. And the boards can, if they choose to, go back to the merger study committee and say, here's what we think about what you're thinking of recommending. And at that point, I think, as you said, the merger study committee can agree or not, pay attention to what the boards believe and or not. And then they make a recommendation. If they recommend merger, it's an automatic. Then there's an automatic set of steps And the set of steps are they finish their report, which they've been writing since they started. Kind of bass-ackwards, if you ask me. But anyway, they finish their report. They send it to the Agency of Education. The Agency of Education reviews it, might give comment or not, and if they and then pretty much lockstep, a vote gets called about whether to merge or not. And no matter what the boards are saying, no matter what feedback they gave, and then the districts decide. I think it's a commingled vote in each district. And if either district says no, then the merger doesn't happen. I think that and that's the process as I understand it. I think that what makes me concerned about the possibility that they will recommend merger, even though we may not be hearing anyone say they think it's a good idea, is that the process they're using to come to a decision about the recommendation is a very odd process. It's very different really from what we did when we were when the Act 46 committee was deciding to consolidate or not to recommend consolidation or not. And the process is they're sort of acting as if they've already decided to merge, and then they're writing the report that they will be sending in if they decide to merge. It's sort of like, so at every meeting, they're sort of living as if they've already decided. And I think that the psychology of that could very easily lead to them deciding to recommend a merger, partly because they've been living as if they already decided it for so many months, but also because they will say, well, let's just recommend it. And if people don't want to do it, they'll vote it down. So, and maybe they will vote it down, but maybe they won't. And there's a serious legal question about whether towns in the middle of that process, once merger has been recommended, have any standing as towns at all to give an opinion or withdraw at that point or any of that. So I was describing it to Paul. This is a terrible analogy, but I was describing it to Paul Forlenza one day, and I was saying, it's sort of like if you go to the Humane Society and say, we're not really going to get a kitten, but let's just bring it home and see what it's like. And so you bring the kitten home, and there's just no way you're not going to end up adopting that kitten, because you've spent time acting as if you're the kitten's home. I mean, it's a terrible analogy, but that's sort of how it feels to me.
Thank you, Nancy. And the kitten, the sad kitten. Go ahead, Liz.
Watching your merger study committee, Nancy, and watching this one, very different for sure. Very different for sure. Absolutely. But one thing I think that we all have to take pause on is that I was been listening to every legislative House education and Senate education on Chapter 11. And that is about withdrawal. And at the same time, they're going through the merger study committee rules as well, right? So there's a lot of things like you've said that could change. And I think it's a valid concern, but there's so much to be unfolded still. So I listened to somebody and I'm like, wow, that's what they think. And then it's completely different because somebody else gets it, another group gets it, and then it's like changed back to something totally different. And then the Agency of Education weighs in, and then it's completely different again. And then but the concept is that they feel it's very urgent. Lincoln, right, and Ripton and Stowe, and then of course they have the Herb testified, right, Mr. Olson, to them, and all of that good stuff. But I also found it really interesting when I was listening. What I heard, for instance, is that if somebody was merging, that 5%, and even if they change it to 15% of the electric or whatever, could actually, a town, 5% of us could get together and ask for a merger on our own, right? Or get an article put on for vote on our own, 5%, right? In terms of getting an article to, like, so they're really all over the place, right? And then they might have just last week taken that away and said, you need to now, like, so basically, and they talked about the study committee. So even this committee, the earliest that they even thought about wrapping up was November, right? It was for a November vote, I think is their current goal, the merger study committee. By then, whatever they decide on will have passed, and that will have passed this summer. And what I heard them say was 5% of people could get together and get something, like, even if you had articles of agreement, that you could then add an article on. Like, we could add an article on by getting a petition done onto those articles, right? So the amount of it that's up in the air that we don't know yet, but we can know. I think we can know by the end of the session. We'll be able to read down through that whole thing, and I can make that commitment to stay on top of it because I want to. And I want to understand it, and I will read it through, and I can put it on like a 1-pager of key things and answer questions about it. I can commit to that part of community engagement this summer, but that's as soon as we're going to know. And right now, I just, whether or not it is really interesting, is a town, are they going to keep that piece where it's dissolved technically? But I think that would only be if there wasn't still a school there, right? So, and none of our schools are going to be closed by over the summer. So I think you would still be able to withdraw even if this came together versus just that. And I'm not sure that they are, like, I don't think we can know anything about all of that at this point and really be concrete on it. We can understand what the rules are now, but I don't think we can understand what they will be. So I think that's another space, kind of like the 6 months that we're talking about holding on and that committee, I assume, is going to really want to understand that very well too. So we might just end up getting a summary of it by listening to their meetings and having their person kind of go down of what the rules are. So, and then that would be at least 2 people are real, and you probably are too, and Herb is too, and all kinds of people are, Paul, right? Everybody. So, and I think that there may be some things in there that can be perceived as making it harder, but I think there are also some things in there that can be perceived as making it easier, in my opinion. So I think that we can't know right now. And much like what this efficiency mindset is going to look like, I think we can't know right now.
It doesn't it argue well, I think, what you said, Liz, really makes me think of this. Wouldn't it make sense for if the merger study committee doesn't want to disband, couldn't they just take a break? I mean, couldn't they just put a timeout on their work until our administrative team does its work in relation to, and our board does its work in relation to the Levinson report? I mean, doesn't the merger study committee's ongoing work right now make a mess of what we're trying to do? I mean, it just seems like at least they could put it on hold for a while until our board and administrative team figure out what a phased-in approach could be. Because in my mind, a phased-in approach is, let's try some of the less radical moves that Nate analyzed in his report. Let's try the less radical things and see if we can make them work. And if we can't make them work, then maybe we've got to move to, more radical, more major changes. But maybe a phased-in approach on the smaller moves would solve the problem. But it won't solve the problem if the merger study committee is up here and, talking about a much more radical move to start.
I guess I'm definitely, I'm going to write it in the notes, one in the minutes. And
But this, I mean,
I think it's interesting because I think the advisory councils are crucial either way. And so my mind starts just going to what is crucial either way and what is in my control, right? What can I do? I can, do little things around town, right? Like I just feel like it's another set of people looking at the same things, and they've already pushed out once by 6 months. Maybe they'll push out again. We're going to hit the end of our COVID funding. And even if we did merge, we don't know if it would be unified union or what it would look like. Thinking about which savings, and even if it did happen, it would still be, they're looking at maybe 4 years before anything would change, putting in some kind of a rule that it would be 4 years until anything was changed at all, like even moving middle school or high school, like, and I'm kind of on the opposite side of you where I'm like, wow, that's a really long time, right? Like, because that's my feeling on that. So, I feel like it's another set of eyes looking at the problem and tackling it, right, from another perspective. And so I feel like it's supportive. And I certainly think it's worth thinking about slowing down, certainly, but it's maybe another thing to get community feedback on, because for me, it's felt like very long. It's felt very long. And I don't know if it's just from just me as a person and my, like, what it feels like for me, just from my circumstance, but, so certainly this is something that could go under this topic here of the minutes of community engagement and the thought exchange, and a question to put out there. How do people feel about that? Do they want to slow it down? Do they want to, like, where are they coming from?
So I see 2 more hands, and I'm thinking maybe a couple more minutes on the merger piece specifically, and then maybe if we can kind of summarize what. And this is a very helpful conversation, so I'm really glad we're having it. Kim, and then Rob.
Yeah, Liz, I think it has been long. I think when Patrick came back with his proposal and we did a survey, and Rob, to your point, I seem to recall 68% of the people that responded wanted the board to pursue a merger. From that survey, the board went back out to the community, asked for proposals, hired a consultant. I mean, everybody knows what the process has been. It's been a long process, and I think that the district has done so much to accommodate input from the community that the hysteria it's all the things that are happening in the background. So it makes everything else feel so long. And it's this sort of threat of disintegration of our district that somehow is the answer to, finding a solution. And it's not. It's what in my mind, it's coming together as a community to make it work. And we have spent the money. We had the work that Nate and his team did was, and most of the people that I've talked to, every person I've talked to that has paid attention to that has felt that that was a really well done report, that the process was inclusive. So I hear about this mistrust, and I think some of that is people's personal feelings that are based on fear, like Krista said. And I think that it feels long because the district has said, okay, we'll do this. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, we'll do this, and has accommodated as much of the community requests as they've been able to. And so slowing down the merger study process, maybe that's something that our board would want to look into. I think Paul came in and said the board's got a lot on their plate. There's a lot going on right now, and figuring out what we can control and what we can do seems like a step in the right direction. And then we as a community engagement committee can provide information to the community about the activities of the district. And I sort of feel like that's where I'm getting lost on this committee, because I want to try to engage people out there that we haven't reached. And we need to figure out what the priority is and what we're going to focus on. And if Nate's proposal has numbers in it that are based on 5 schools and Lincoln leaves, does that make the proposal unused or the recommendation unusable? I mean, those are the things I think that we as a community engagement committee should be focusing on, and that we should figure out how we're going to communicate that to the larger community. So that's all.
Thanks, Kim. Rob?
I think we can save this this meeting under like air dirty laundry, community engagement 3/1/2022. I've tried to go back to I guess the original draft agenda and draft timeline and everything we've talked about a lot, obviously circulating around the merger study committee, but again, going back to Nate's report, like it's part of the report. Whether we want to call out the merger study committee or not, this idea of merging is in the report. As usual, the devil's in the details, but big picture wise, which a lot of the report focuses on, and where I think where most people would engage at it at a super, super high level, I think there's a lot of great things we can ask people. I think this is an opportunity where we go out and ask, we don't necessarily tell, and tell folks what's right. Like, and I just keep going back to like the comments from our last board meeting about like the board sort of, I don't remember the exact words, but motioning or having an action item to like move 6th grade into Mount Abe. And it's like, well, let's just ask people like if that's a popular idea. Yeah, Nate said it makes sense on paper, but does it really make sense? And so I that's one example. But I think we have a great opportunity to ask questions right now, not necessarily to tell people what they should think about what was presented. And that is both within our district and within Northern Addison County.
Thanks, Rob. Mary, haven't heard from you, my friend. I know how much you love speaking, but anything you want to share with us?
I feel like I'm just getting caught up. It's really good to hear all the perspectives, and yeah, I don't need to add any more to it.
Okay. Thank you. Just scanning to see. Okay. Well, Rob, I think, dirty laundry is what we're all about. We all got to get comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. And one of the reasons why I love this committee is that there are community members on it with different ideas and thoughts. And there's some more freedom because we're small to have hard conversations. So I think we're doing it pretty respectfully, even if it's hard. We don't agree. So I'm all for that. And I will just, conclude it when it's time to go.
What we haven't done is help to really answer your key question.
No, actually, I think you have, because what I was going to sort of reflect back was what I think I heard and what I'm going to suggest. So we definitely, what I think I heard was that we can get people's input and questions on the proposal. I think we can do that and should do that.
On what, Kristen?
I'm sorry, on Nate's report. And that we should also let folks know what's happening with the merger study committee. The merger study committee one, I think what I'm going to recommend and we did this once before, and I know Nancy, you actually helped with some of the content on that because you know a lot more about the way that process will unfold than I do. But there's two things I think we want to share with folks, and one is not really yet fully baked. So the first thing is like reminding people what their process is and what the decision making looks like and who votes and some of the just like the mechanics of what is this committee. And we did that once before, and I think the language already exists. We'll just put it out again. And maybe we can even direct people to the most recent summary of their work. But the other piece that's not fully baked yet is that the board, and you can maybe remind me, Rob or Liz, is that it's, we started to try to have a conversation about, as a board, what do we think about the merger study committee work? And do we have any kind of consensus around our opinions about that work that we want to go back to that committee and share? We started the conversation, but we were missing 2 of our members. And so that's on the docket. I don't know if we decided the date and time, but what I would propose in this first communication is that if we know when that's going to be, we let people know, here's how this committee works. Here's when the board's going to talk about it. Because a lot of the comments and feedback that folks brought up tonight, you can bring up to the full board before we have that conversation, as can other people. And then once we have that, I think that would be another communication we want to send out to folks. So communication about right now, Nate's report went out. Here are the links to it. Here's what we know about how the merger study committee works. Here's when the board's going to talk about that more. That'd be the first step. Second step would be thought exchange around questions and thoughts you have about what you read in Nate's report. I like the idea of getting people's feedback on the merger study committee. My concern, and maybe others don't have this concern, and feel free to disagree with me. My concern is that it's still so nebulous that I would rather wait until we have a little more information about exactly what they're even thinking. Like, I want to make sure we get feedback from folks when it's most valuable, and maybe it's not yet that time. So,
Krista, one thought is to, in the thought exchange, and I don't know if you would do them in separate thought exchanges, but is to ask people if they're aware of the activity of the merger study. Are you aware of the merger study committee? Are you aware of the work that they're doing? And would you be interested in further communication about how to access the meetings? Or just, again, we're trying to engage people. And I think a lot of people just don't know about what they're doing because it isn't really showing up anywhere unless you're really active and involved and, have a couple hours to sit and listen in on a meeting. So, so that might be a way just to get people to recognize, to be aware of the fact that these talks are going on. Their plan is to have a vote in November. If our district board is going to potentially have some input, maybe we could then ask for our district community members to provide input to the board around the merger. So that they would be speaking directly to our own board as opposed to trying to navigate the combined board. So so I think that could be a really good use of thought exchange, whether or not we do it in this first one and maybe just focus on Nate's proposal. Might be better to do it for the next one. Or just, I think you were going to check in with the thought exchange people to see if they recommended sort of cross purposes in a thought exchange, whether that was going to be effective or whether it was good to sort of keep them separate and silo them.
right. And maybe there's something in between, maybe we could ask people if they know about the merger study committee, and if they have questions, we could do that too. But thank you. Other thoughts about what I proposed, Nancy?
Well, I'm thinking about the part that you proposed about the Levinson report, and I think it'll be challenging and fun to think about how to structure that in a way that really works. You know, one of the things I noticed about when he came to talk about the report, when it was done in draft form, he did such a great job of, he had a pretty concise, interesting slideshow, and he didn't go through every single piece of the report. He just sort of, he did a high level talk that was I thought really well done, but I had read the report. So I mean, I just wonder if number one, whether we probably have a video of that and whether we can use it, or whether he'd do it again. But also how we could give people some direction or guidance about reading the report. Like, don't just stop at the start with the executive summary, but then jump to the components and see what you discover there and see what questions they raised for you. I'm just thinking about the challenge of getting people to take a close look at that.
Can I just share one suggestion in regards to that? I think it could be helpful to have maybe a little bit of a glossary for folks who might not be familiar with some of the terms being used. And that I think would be a great tool for engaging people in their report.
Yeah. I like both of those ideas. And I wonder if either of you or anybody else would be willing to help me figure out, because I do think queuing up the thought exchange so that it's really useful for folks. They don't just get buried in this really long report, but that they get the most important pieces. The key takeaways, I think, is important.
Krista.
Yeah.
What about like the thought exchange? I like we're trying to engage community, but is there other tactics we're using besides the thought exchange? I'm just concerned that that's become this be all end all. And I just don't think that a lot of people necessarily would engage with the thought exchange. So a tactic question. And then could there be could we ask Nate to just give a quick 10-minute overview in video form? I mean, it's very easy to do, right? You can just record himself. I just feel like that's something that people watch videos more than they read reports, if that would be something. And then you can put that on the website, or I don't even know. I'm from Porch Forum.
Yeah, I mean, he did last time we spoke say, if you need anything, moving this forward.
I really like that idea, Mary, and I think if he could distill, even his presentation to the board, which I just thought was really well done, and for those of us that aren't, super involved, it was really, he's a really clear speaker, and I think he boils things down to a place where it's very easy to kind of understand, and he probably could do a 10-minute video if he'd be willing to do it, that we could share out. And I think it would, for all the people that didn't get to watch that presentation or that aren't going to take the time to dive deep into the report, I think it will give them a sense of what this process was all about, and that, okay, so this is where we are in the process. And so I'm going to be looking for what the next steps are going to be. And that's what I think is also important to share with people is, so here we are, here's how we got here, here's where we are now, and this is where we will go with the information.
Yeah. I wonder if my memory of his talk was that he didn't really go through the components that he analyzed, but I wonder if there's a way for him, it'll be like the Nate Levinson show. And and maybe there's a way for him to, I'm just wondering if people probably won't feel they have time to read the whole thing. Is there a way we can get some summaries of at least what the components are? But they're complicated. I mean, you can't just explain them in a phrase, each one. They're bigger than that. Tricky.
Yeah, let's think on that. And love people's feedback. And to your point, Mary, I think that's a really good point about what else are we doing, and one we always need to be thinking about here in this committee. If this purpose of this particular thought exchange is to share information and give people a chance to ask questions, then finding other media to do that, like Front Porch Forum to share the information, whatever the other tools are, the Addie Indy, Front Porch Forum. I think we've been trying to make sure we share info in a lot of ways, but I think it's just as important to give people a chance, besides a thought exchange, to ask their questions. And I think we have provided emails before of like my email or Don's where people can direct questions. And I think that's really helpful. But then that's also why on the timeline I put in community forum, because I do think we need to get people together to have a chance to talk through some of this stuff in person in small groups. And that works really well for people. It's a really nice way to build community. I'll never forget the one we did with Sue McCormick, where we had like 300 plus people in the Mount Abe cafeteria. It's pretty powerful to get people together. So I'd really
then
like
we
us
could
to get back.
jigsaw it, right? I mean, we could put people in groups and have them be in charge of understanding a section of it and then explaining it to everyone else.
Yeah. Other thoughts about our plans moving forward?
Did you get
I
the
really-
help you need to put that together, Krista?
Well, usually look to a couple of folks to help me with my draft for the column. And then, so if I can get my my friends. Oh my gosh. If I could get a couple people, I was going to say my buddies, Nancy and Kim, if you guys would help me with the column, that'd be awesome. Anyone else is welcome too. But what I'd also love is some feedback on how to distill the report.
Krista, I'm going to be away until the 15th.
Okay.
And then I can help. Can I just say, I also think your idea about how to proceed around the merger study committee, to give people information about the mechanics and the process, to give people information about the board specific plans for discussing a possible message to the merger study committee, and when that's going to be, so that people can know to be there and listen and provide input. Maybe I think that's a good way to go.
Did we set a date on that yet, Rob or Liz? Do you guys know if that's scheduled yet for?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing anything quite yet.
Okay.
I would say, from Starksborough's point of view, the sooner the better.
I was assuming it would be the next facilities meeting, which would be our next meeting.
I kind of thought that, but I wasn't sure if what we said at the last call, and I haven't yet worked on our upcoming agendas with Dawn. So, okay. Yeah, Coco, would you be willing to help with the glossary piece of Nate's report?
Sure,
Is
yeah.
that something?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be willing to kind of do a first read through and sort of highlight some of the terminology and share
That
that
would be great.
books, and then we can start to maybe work together in a Google document to distill what some of those terms mean, and then kind of go from there to see if we can create a more concise glossary. And it be a little bit longer because they are complex terms, but I do think it would be helpful for folks to have a reference point as they read through the document.
That would be great. So I think my ambition of doing a thought exchange next week is probably a little too unrealistic. Because I think what I'm hearing is it's really important we figure out exactly how we're going to inform people about the report before we ask them for their questions and input. So let's keep working on that. And in the meantime, though, I definitely think we can get some communication out to people about what's coming up. What else? What am I missing? Let's see. Oh my gosh, it's 7:54. So probably it's about time to go. What other last thoughts do people want to get out there into the universe? All right, well, I think I'll ask for a motion to adjourn then if we're all set. And thanks everybody for showing up. I appreciate it. Liz or Rob, do you want to just throw it out there that you're moving to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. 7:55. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank
great night.
you.
We'll be in touch.
Thanks,
Krista.
Krista.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Krista.
Krista.